Today, I just wanted to talk about a few things that I'm seeing online, on Reddit, on YouTube, on Twitter, about kind of anxiety that developers are having with the rise of large language models, what is commonly known as AI, and the end of 2024. I wanted to alleviate some of that anxiety with this video because I don't see the job of a web developer going away. I do see it changing, and I do see the expectation for productivity to increase exponentially, but there's still a need for software developers and web developers in general. And I'm going to get into why I feel that way. The three things that really jump out at me are the time required, the deeper knowledge and understanding, and the execution and maintenance. So the first point I want to talk about is time. If any time is required for a business to do something, the likelihood of them outsourcing it to an agency or another company or a service provider is almost guaranteed. I'm not sure if any of you have worked with a small business owner or a small business in general, but those people don't have a lot of time. If it's a successful small business, the time that they have to do tasks like build their own website is non-existent. In fact, you could think of a small business owner ordering in office supplies as a pretty good example of that. There might be a Staples on their way to work, but in order to save time and to save the hassle of waiting in line, or maybe a certain item is out of stock, they don't do that. They order supplies into their business. So if any time is required, they're going to outsource it because they're going to focus on running their business. Another parallel would be driveway sealing. I have all the tools at my disposal to seal my own driveway. I live in upstate New York, so the winters get pretty cold and we get ice and things on the pavement, so driveways need to be sealed pretty frequently here. Some people do it every year, some people do it a few times every 10 years, but that is something that people do in this area. For me to do this task would take about half a weekend day, so a half of a Saturday, in order to seal my driveway. And I value my time a little bit more than that. I want to spend my time with my kids on that half Saturday or in my garden planting vegetables. I don't necessarily want to be doing this task that I'm not an expert in. That's why I would hire someone as a service to do it. And I see web development and software development doing the same thing, becoming more service focused rather than having a dedicated on-premise team of web developers. So the good news is I think web development is not going away. Software development obviously is not going away, but it might move more into agencies, more into a service type role, an off-premise service that you would call when you need a website built, more so than it is already. The second item I want to talk about is knowledge, or like a deep understanding. Anyone right now can go to ChatGPT, can go to Google's Gemini, can go to any of these large language model services and ask it to build a website and make changes and make a Python app and change things in there, but they don't really understand what's happening because they're just having code thrown at them. If you're not an expert and you're not knowledgeable at what's happening, you're going to just think that it's magic and not understand what's going on. I think a great example of this is how people are building these things with large language models and they have no clue that version control exists. They don't know what it is. They're building these things and they're making multiple changes, but they don't know how to go back. And there is now in ChatGPT Canvas, there's a back button, but maybe you want to go back 4 changes and you want to keep some certain features. They have no idea what version control is. That's a good example of how someone with more knowledge and more understanding can not only save time doing this, but they can make changes easier. They can bring back changes easier. If someone's using code that ChatGPT or some of these other AI products spit out, their understanding is really only skin deep. They don't understand what's happening. So that can cause a lot of frustration. That can cause a lot of wasted time. So I think the idea that anyone can build a React app or an iOS app at this point in 2024, it's overblown. People don't know what they're looking at. They just get spit this code and they don't know what it means. And to go back to the driveway sealing comparison, People that do that every day, they have much deeper knowledge than I do. They're probably going to use better products because they know what works well. They know what works well in my environment, in my location. They know not only the order of operations on how to get things done, but the small tips and tricks and nuances that come with this job to do an overall better job than I could have done by myself. Even though I have access to the internet, I have access to YouTube, I can look up and watch these YouTube videos. They're obviously going to have a deeper understanding and do a better job in the long term than I could. And the last piece that I wanted to touch on is execution and maintenance. So execution specifically, people are throwing this code, but they don't necessarily know the best way to go about deploying or using the code. They'll have to ask ChatGPT that and rely on that and hope that that's correct. And then the maintenance obviously is going to be an afterthought with people that use large language models to produce things like this. I don't think these models are to the point now where they can accurately produce maintenance tools in a way that a developer could who has the knowledge and understanding of the environment and the code base. So I think maintenance is going to be a super huge issue. I would be surprised if within 5 or 10 years, if these large language models really nail the kind of maintenance involved, the testing, the deployment, the continuous deployment, those types of things aren't a part of the code that I'm seeing that's generated with large language models. So that still has a way to go. And I, again, would be surprised if within 5 or 10 years they really nail that. I think within 5 or 10 years, the highs are going to be really high. I think there's a possibility that AGI is a thing in 10 years. And I think that obviously these large language models will improve. But for your normal everyday people trying to deploy their own software, I think it'll get marginally better. But I think that these 3 points will still remain. So in summary, if you're worried about software development or web development as a career, I wouldn't be worried. I think the expectations are going to be higher now that we have these tools. So you might be expected to produce more code and better code and kind of work within the guardrails of whatever the project you're working on, but have access to these tools to make you a better programmer. But I think for normal everyday people, business owners in particular, if it requires any amount of time, they're going to outsource their stuff to an agency. It's going to require a deeper knowledge and understanding than they know. So going back to the driveway ceiling example, they don't know the best way to go about it. They don't want to spend half a Saturday building a website, and they don't know the best way of deploying and maintaining that website. I don't see that improving enough that web development and software development cease to exist as a career within the next decade. But who knows? I could be wrong. These are just things that I think about as a developer. Part of the reason that I'm putting this out here is I want to upload this video and look back in 5 or 10 years and see if I was right or wrong. To summarize, development, software development, web development, I think it's going to move more towards agencies and off-premise. I think the expectations of a web developer and software developer will increase. But I think because of these 3 things, it'll continue to be a career in 5 or 10 years. And people that think otherwise, I feel, don't know what they're talking about. If you feel strongly that this career would go away, I would love for you to comment and tell me where I'm wrong and maybe give me an example of a full stack application that's deployed correctly, that's maintained correctly, that's working and nothing is broken out of the box with the initial commit. And then also it's got to be pretty much 0 time spent, because again, any small business owner or business owner, they don't really have time to mess around with ChatGPT. It's got to be almost instant. So here's the requirement. In order for a small business or a company to basically never hire a web developer or a software developer, they have to build an application with 1 prompt. Takes 30 seconds or less. It has to be perfectly coded. It has to be a full stack web application, perfectly coded, works with the initial commit, 1 prompt, and it has to be perfectly deployed with that commit, perfectly maintained with test, with continuous deployment. Everything has to work with 1 prompt, 30 seconds. I don't think we get there in 5 years. This is just something that I was thinking about. I know it's not a typical video that I make, but I thought it was interesting enough to discuss. And like I said, I wanted to mark my place in the sand and put this out in the universe to see how close I get. We'll check back in 5 or 10 years and see where we're at, see if I was right or if I was wrong. Thank you so much for watching. I hope this was entertaining, and if you agree or disagree, let me know down below. I'd love to engage and talk to you about it. Maybe I have a blind spot somewhere. Thank you so much for watching. Have a great day.